their cameras and microphones off until they're called by myself as chairman to speak. However, would all members of the committee also switch their microphones off until called by the chairman to speak, as this will limit any feedback issues that we might have. Should any of you wish to speak during the meeting, please raise your hand using that function that's available to you in Teams. And if that function doesn't work on your screen for any reason, either indicate on screen your wish to speak or by using the chat facility. I'd request that the chat facility be limited to use only if there are connection issues or function issues, in order that all comments that are made are addressed during the meeting itself. Should you have any technical difficulties during the meeting, please contact Democratic Services Office separately during the meeting, please. Is that everything? Happy with that? Can I just check in terms of, sorry, Jeff, do you want to tell us if we've had any apologies for absence first?
Only one apology, Chairman, and that's from Councillor Neil Thomas. Sorry, I noticed Councillor Robertson's hand is up.
Ah, already. Okay. Andy. Your hand is up, Andy.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. I just wondered, do all the councillors have to declare an interest on item 4?
No.
Okay, good. I was going to ask that myself. Okay, no problems. Then, other than that, then are there any declarations? Oh, sorry, it's minutes first, isn't it? I'm jumping ahead in my rush. Are we all happy to acknowledge the minutes as an accurate representation of the previous meeting?
Yes, happy to approve the minutes.
Brilliant, thank you. And then moving on then, are there any declarations of interest under the Council's Code of Conduct? No, okay. In that case then, should we move on to item 4, which is the Independent Remuneration Panel for Wales's Draft Annual Report 2022-23 consultation?
If you like, Chairman, I'll take members through the report, if that's okay with you.
Sure thing. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, the purpose of the report committee is to apprise members of the IRPW's draft report for 2022-23. It's prepared in accordance with section 147 of the Local Government Wales Measure 2011, in that the IRPW are required to publish an annual report which would have an effect on the financial year 2022-23. So this is the 14th version of the IRP's report, and is also published to meet the requirements of the 2011 measure. What I will do, Chairman, if it's okay for you, I will highlight, whilst it's not in the report, I'll highlight some of the key things that are in the body of the IRPW's report in itself. So the panel has consistently expressed the view that local democracy and governance within the public services is not cost-free, and that should be valued and allow everybody to participate. The levels of remuneration have been set to, on this occasion, to encourage sufficient diversity of willing and able people to undertake in local governance through elections and appointments and co-optees going forward in the future. And as I indicated, the panel has expressed for some time that the remuneration of elected members throughout local government Wales has not kept pace with the ordinary measures of inflation and other public comparators. For example, the RPI, Retail Price Index, Consumer Price Index, the National Joint Council Terms and Conditions for Public Sector and Employees. Also included in these measures is the National Living Wage, the Living Wage Foundation, and members of the Senedd remuneration, MPs, and the Hourly Survey on Earnings, otherwise known as, or the acronym as ASH. So the draft annual report also goes on to further highlight that payments in local government across the 22 local authorities for councillors has not kept pace with the comparators such as ASH. And of course, the financial constraints on public sector generally, and particularly within local government over many years, has meant that the link with average Welsh earnings has not been maintained. So the panel has considered this had undervalued the worth of elected councillors, and it was now time to restore the link between the most appropriate comparator, which is the Ash comparator, and therefore to achieve things like proportionality and the same overall average amount of earnings across across Wales that constituents received in 2020, the panel has believed that the determinations set out in the appendix are appropriate for local government across Wales for elected members. Obviously, next year is a local government election year, so the determinations of the RPW would normally take effect on the 1st of April. However, because the local government elections are going to be taking place, these determinations will take effect from the 9th of May. So the information set out in the appendix to the report, Chairman, are the proposed determinations set out in the draft annual report for consultation, and the consultation deadline is the 26th of November, and the proposed draft response is set out for members' consideration, and obviously subject to members' comments that will allow the council to respond to the IRPW's consultation exercise on behalf of the council.
Thank you, Jeff. Can I ask a quick question, and then I'll put it open to see if anyone wants to add any comments and debate, discuss, etc. Obviously, the recommendations that we note the report and consider any consultation response. So presumably that's a consultation response that might be written for on behalf of and from this committee. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the draft consultation response is the appendix, which is the document at the rear of the. It's the table of information to the rear of I think it's at Appendix A, Chairman.
Yeah.
And this is the format that we dealt with it at the committee last year.
Okay. All right. Does anyone want to come in? I can see Andy's got his hand up. And then Sally.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm a bit queasy about this. I think, given the situation that the rest of the country is in, the fact that I know Jeff's been saying that we've been squeezed in local government, but private sector has been squeezed very hard as well by circumstances rather than anything else. I feel that this isn't the right time to be doing this. I think it'll go down. It won't go down well with the residents who probably are suffering more than we are at the moment. I'd like to say that it's a difficult one because I know that there has been a falling off in the relationship between Ash and the remuneration for councillors, but at the same time, for the same reasons as opposed to at this time starting 2 new directorships in the council, which is going to cost £280,000. For the same reasons, I think it would be a good. I'd like to say gesture, but I mean that sounds like it's virtue signalling, and it's not. I think it would be a good thing if actually we said, okay, everybody else is suffering, we could suffer a bit too. And if we, I mean, that's quite a big hike, actually. I mean, it's 2/7, which is what, 15%, something like that. That's a hell of a hike, really. I know it has to last a while, and it's reflecting small increments recently over the past. But at the same time, I don't think this is the right time. And I think we ought to suggest that it's either drastically reduced or actually put on hold. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Andy. Sally, do you want to come in next?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, how does the IRPW work in relation to funding coming from Welsh Government? Do the increases come from the finances of individual authorities, or is it funded by Welsh Government? And also a second part of that question, with the 7 more elected members coming on board in May, is that funded by Welsh Government as well, or does local authority have to pay for that? Thank you, Chair.
Is that under 4.2, Jeff, where it says there's a theoretical financial cost to the council of the extra salaries plus the 7 new councillors? I think it says on page 5, Sally. The total, it's just underneath the table with the pay rises. So it says the total theoretical financial cost as a result of these recommendations, or determinations rather, is that, and with the growing of by 7 councillors, is that it would cost around £165,000.
Yeah.
And this would need to be fully reflected in future budgets. So it's a cost that has to be borne by the council. Is that correct, Jeff? Yeah.
All the costs would be borne. So the boundary review proposals, which I believe have gone through recently, and obviously the IRPW determinations are obviously going to have to be funded directly from each respective authority. So the figure you see in the report is for the IRPW determinations. The actual increase overall with the addition of the boundary review is something in the region of another 135k, so roughly about £300,000 increase. And there's a cost pressure bid that's gone in by myself to obviously take account of the, should we need to take account of the determinations of members choosing to claim that. Of course, the determinations are not set for the approval of council. We're expected under the legislation to abide by them, and there's various reasons for that. I can appreciate Councillor Robertson's comments in regard to the wider context of where the economy is. I think the issue of where the IRPW are coming from is that they're trying, hence the 15%, circa 15% uplift in comparison, is obviously taken account of lost ground over the years where it hasn't kept pace with things like ash. So it's trying to reset the clock in terms of that. But also, I suppose it's one thing to say we can't take it now, given current individual members, but of course looking to the future, an election next year, how do you attract more diversity into local government? How sustainable is that? Is the level of remuneration enough or sufficient to allow people to give up more than just the 3 days, which is obviously the calculation is based on in terms of salaries, is based on 3 days a week working full time, I suppose, for the senior salaries. And obviously if you're a local member who doesn't have a senior salary or an ordinary councillor, obviously the other factors, what time you do spend on constituency work balanced against all the other pressures in terms of family life, personal work, such like. So it's a difficult one for them because they're trying to balance all those different factors. And also trying to make the remuneration sufficiently attractive going forward to attract, a wider breadth of candidates potentially standing for the elections in local government.
It's a key distinction there between recommendation and determination at the end of the day, isn't it? I mean, they've determined that's what and I guess we do have to bear that in mind. I mean, I share Andy's concerns given the kind of financial climate that people are facing, and perhaps we'll see how the conversation develops in terms of whether we express our concerns as a committee in light of everything that's happened. But it is a determination, and what Jeff's saying about binding future councillors who aren't currently even elected is quite a tricky one to manage. But I mean, if you look at it, it's a 17%. I think I had it down as a 17% rise, and then you've got the leader's salary going up by 13.5%, the deputies by 13.1%, and then all the cabinet members by 10% as well. So it is quite a hefty chunk. I had Sandra pop up first, wanted to speak, and then Catherine, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. I keep freezing, so I might have to turn my camera off again. Just basically, I mean, with the economic climate the way as it is at the moment, it is sort of really difficult to be seen to be, sort of accepting this remuneration increase, if you like. But I would go along with what the officer said about increasing the diversity of people, that we need to have in the council. For me personally, I was a lone parent with 2 children. I would never think about, giving up part of my salary to try and do this. And if we want to attract people of various, sort of backgrounds and stuff like that, and not just people, say, who are my age, who's now hasn't got the financial burdens that I did have when I was younger. If we want to attract younger people and people who are perhaps in the middle of their careers and stuff like that, then people from different backgrounds, then I think the remuneration has to be at a level that people think, yes, I can take that risk. Yes, I will be secure for those 5 years or whatever. And I think that's one of the reasons that it does need to be sort of, considered and taken on board, really. So, yeah, I think if it can increase diversity, I think all for the good.
Catherine, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to comment very similarly the way that Councillor Perks did. We need to look forward to how the council is going to look in the future, and in relation to people who are single parents, people who've got caring obligations, people who've got issues with mobility, in relation to how they could get to council, whether it's virtual or not. It's a really important consideration. We're all sitting councillors. We all know that when people ask us how much we earn, they laugh at us and say, it can't possibly be worth you doing that. And I would say on the whole that most of us aren't councillors for the money. We're councillors because we're invested in our local communities. So whilst I appreciate what Councillor Robertson's saying at the moment in time, I absolutely understand. But I think that we need to just try and find some sort of some grand level to allow people to think that, yes, they can do that. Because we all know that it takes a lot more of our time than possibly we all thought when we started. And our time is not free. We've all got other commitments in relation to having other jobs. We've got children, we've got elderly parents to look after. And we do need to try and increase the diversity in relation to age, gender, and all of those things that need to be involved. And I think it's a good way forward to try and encourage that. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, does it? But we've got to try somewhere.
All valid points. I mean, I guess the one thing is obviously to consider whether there's obviously more than just one way to encourage diversity, and money is just one of those angles. So I appreciate the point Sandra's making about people, especially, I suppose, people who are in the middle of a career where they might earn, and it's the same goes for assembly members. It's always been an argument, and MPs even, they can get paid a hell of a lot more to work in certain private sector roles than they do in public service. But we're, like you said, we're not motivated. We're not here. You could earn a lot more money for the time that we spend doing this elsewhere. It's because of a desire to support local communities. Mark first, and then I think Andy wanted to come back in.
Points to be made well on both sides here of the argument. I mean, obviously we are in an economic crisis to a certain extent. Some of it's due to COVID, some of it's due to Brexit. And obviously, we do have those issues at the moment, and they're not going to go away in the short term. So I'm well aware of the economic circumstances. Having said that, as Sandra and Catherine rightly said, we do need to increase diversity. We as a council are quite good in terms of having a diverse council in terms of representatives. And I think that's because we have a lot of meetings which don't occur during the day. Because I think if you have a lot of meetings occur during the day, you're going to restrict the number of people who want to stand for the council. Because a lot of people, okay, if you make up the population, do work, and they normally work 9 till 5. So that's always been one of the issues. One of the reasons that attracts me to our council, unlike another council around the corner from me, is Cardiff, where they have a lot of meetings that occur during the day. And they have other problems because of that. And they've had a lot of resignations of councillors because of that as well. So I do think we need to get the balance right. And it's not easy, it's not easy at all. But I mean, a lot of us do we do our council work. We do a lot of voluntary work with it. Lots of us involved in community centres, lots of us in school governors. We don't get remuneration for that. But that comes part and parcel of being a councillor. And I think, that's all part of it. And, and it becomes very much part of the territory. So I do think we need to try and diverse councillors. And I said for a backbench member, 14 or 15,000 money. It's not a huge amount of money if you take away tax and whatever. It's less than £1,000 take home. And we should bear that in mind and consider that, and even increasing it further. Bearing in mind increasing national insurance, increasing in taxation generally, And inflation, it's largely going to disappear, that increase, to be quite honest with you. So, I mean, it's largely staying still because inflation is going to go up further and further. It's one big company, Bulb, is now going to the wall. That's going to cause 1.5 million people to find more dearer electricity and gas bills. And that's going to have an impact upon everybody. So I shut up, but I take both sides on this. Both sides have got value points here, but I do think we need to increase diversity of the council.
Thanks, Mark. Andy, you've got your hand up to come back in, I'm assuming.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Quite briefly, well, the first thing I'd like to say is I think in answer to what Mark said, I think the reason a lot of council meetings are held in the evening is that historically councillors weren't paid at all. And so they did their job during the day and they went to council meetings in the evening. I've been told that by a lot of very elderly ex-councillors. I find it difficult to agree with Catherine on people saying to me, how do you survive on 13,500 a year? I actually get the opposite. I get quite a lot of people saying, what the hell are you getting paid that amount for? And which I hope doesn't reflect on the way I'm a councillor, but I think a lot of people don't understand what councillors do, which I think crops up later on in this meeting anyway. And in terms of people being encouraged to become councillors if they're disabled or if they have young families, I think this council, over the course of the period I've been a councillor, which isn't very long, has gone quite a long way to addressing that in terms of allowing extra money for childcare and things like that. I think that's already being addressed as an outside of the basic remuneration package. There is help for people who actually are going to be suffering financially as a result of being a councillor. So I don't know. I understand everything you're saying about trying to encourage diversity and trying to help people become councillors who might not otherwise be councillors. Well, I am worried that we're getting near the territory where people will want to be councillors because it does pay well. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Andy. I can't really see any other hands up at this point. I mean, for my part, just to add a couple my own comments, just a couple of thoughts I've got was similar to what Andy said in the start about the timing. I feel like a lot of people have been struggling quite substantially financially, and it feels bad to be putting forward what is such a substantive pay rise at this point. But I do hear the comments that are made about diversity, and I do hear fundamentally the fact that this is a determination rather than a recommendation. And you do have to caveat all of that with the fundamental principle that we shouldn't be setting our own pay, and therefore having an independent panel to do this and make these recommendations does give us some cover on that point. And I think everyone's had an opportunity in this session to make their own personal views on this very clear, and that's all there recorded on the record. So given that it is a report to note, unless anyone's got any objections, I suggest we note it. I know that Jeff, you're looking to come back in there, but I mean that we've done our job in the sense that we've discussed it. We've all made our points very clear. It's all there on the record for all to see. It's a determination and it's an independent one, and we're noting the report. That's all we're being asked to do. Jeff, did you have anything to add there?
Yes, Chairman, if I could. I can completely understand the varying sentiments. Councillor Robertson, you're not a lone voice in expressing the views that you're expressing. In fact, most leaders of 22 council have gone back to the RPW and expressed the concerns you're already alluding to. And again, it's a difficult one when leaders of administrations across Wales are basically saying to Welsh Government, we don't think that the determinations of the RPW in terms of timing are the best at the moment. The double-edged sword is that you're acknowledging in one hand the detrimental impact on the economy. So if somebody did want to come in into local government, I suppose the risk is that, what incentives are there in terms of remuneration if the salary of the ordinary member of your constituents being adversely affected because of the economic downturn as it stands at the moment. So I would just simply say, bear in mind that that's trying to bring that measure back up in terms of councillors' remuneration. And it is a fair point that Councillor Robertson said, there is a general lack of understanding by the public of the level of commitment that local members, put an enormous amount of time in. I know that. I regularly have, interesting discussions with family members about the work I do and the misinformation that the work that elected colleagues do, and getting that message across is always devilishly tricky if parents, brothers, sisters, cousins, or whatever it is, pick up the local newspaper and believe everything that's printed in black and white. So you've got to try and turn that boat around, and that's always difficult. What I would say also, and Councillor Robertson is absolutely correct, the levelling up, if you want to use that which is a very popular phrase at the moment, the family absence levelling up that the council accepted in an early report this year, and that's gone into the constitution. That is simply levelling up what elected members didn't have in terms of their comparators with employees. So what you have is, and I think if you think about maternity leave, for example, if you're an elected member, you were at a disadvantage. So if you were a young councillor with a family, a dad coming in, and you wanted some time off in family absence, you would have been a less beneficial arrangement than staff in the organisation would have. So as an elected member of the Vale, you would have been at a less beneficial arrangement than somebody like myself who could access the same arrangements. So that's where the levelling up is coming from there. And again, I suppose that's another demonstration of where councillors are lagging behind with employees in the same organisation, but also comparators across different sectors. And there is a difficult one. Members were sent I think I emailed members individually, invited them to respond directly to the IRPW consultation. I think I emailed on about the 6th of October. I'm not sure if all members took up that invitation to go back to the IRP directly. There is still time to do that if individual members wanted to do that, and I would simply encourage them to do that, because they will always listen to what members have to say, whether that's a collective response of the authority or as individuals. The chairman is right, they are determinations. Well, what I would say in terms of determinations, that individual members don't have to take that up. So every year they have the opportunity of declining that, but they would need to notify me as the head of Democratic that they intend to decline that, and we can pull all the necessary levers to put that in place. So as much as individual feelings, for whatever reason, may be strong, I would simply say to you is that it's also tricky for the IRPW. The panel members are made up of volunteers. They are well respected, knowledgeable backgrounds on the IRPW, but they've had a really tricky time this year trying to find, the middle ground on where the determination should rest for the period post next year's elections. That's all I'm prepared. That's all I have to say, Chairman. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. I guess we're going to hope that your cost pressure bid is successful and Welsh Government's going to give us a bit of support to pay for it if it goes through, because
well, I would. Well, it's always tricky speaking to accountants on cost pressure, because they hate that expression. The moment you go to them and say you've got a cost pressure, it is almost like you could hear hysterical crying coming from up on the second floor. The fact is that we don't get, there's no funding coming from the determinations, or indeed from the boundary review, is something we just it's the price of democracy at the end of the day, I suppose. Whether individually or collectively as members, groups, etc., agree with it, it's just something, unfortunately, we have to live with. And yes, in a an environment where financials are already a challenge. And yes, we've got to find this funding.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thanks, Jeff. In that case, I mean, it's pretty clear. I mean, we're noting the recommendation. So
what I would like, Chairman, is the committee to endorse it, the response.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
And what I will be doing is, subject to the committee's endorsement, is referring it on to cabinet, so cabinet cited, and also onto the next council meeting on the 6th. Not onto the next council meeting. Sorry, just no. Ignore me.
Start again, Jeff.
Sorry, I'm getting confused with the next report. So ignore those last two comments. This response will go off to the IRPW, subject to the committee's endorsement, in time by the 26th of November.
Okay. Are we all happy to do that then? No objections. Brilliant. Okay. Moving on then to item 5, the report on councillor safety and support.
Yes, Chairman. Sorry, I'm just going to turn the light on a minute. It's gone very dark here. Just hold on a moment. Apologies for that. It's what happens when you sit still in an office and the sensor doesn't activate.
It still looks like a bright sunny day where you are. With your back.
I'm in a halo now. Yeah. So this report has been brought to the committee, obviously in the context of the recent events in Southend with the MP. It's also acknowledging the fact that the alert level has also increased in the UK overall in terms of a terrorist threat. So I've had the opportunity to look where we are as an organisation, a council, in terms of the support we provide to elected members. I know historically when we've provided development to members and induction and all that sort of stuff, we've hit you with a whole raft of different information you can get from various organisations, if you like, guidance that's already out there, the best practice and all that sort of stuff. But what we didn't have in place is a simple guide that members, if you like, that they can call upon to follow when they are going to be out and about, and the necessary checks that they should have in mind when they're dealing with constituents. So this report sets out guidance so that councillors can understand the steps that they should take to keep themselves safe. I will say that the health and safety policy of the authority applies to elected members regardless. So members are caught by our existing health and safety policy, and underpinning that health and safety policy, we already have an existing lone working policy, and that also covers our elected members. That lone working policy is currently under review. But that said, we're operating on the basis of the lone working policy, which is attached to the report, which members hopefully would have read and taken on board. And then in addition to that, I felt that it would be some useful guidance to be prepared, as I said, to allow members to carry out their roles safely and effectively. The important factor as well is that the committee itself are also, responsible for providing support to elected members, and the best that they can do. I have to say that we haven't had any approaches formally for financial support in regard to control measures to support elected members. I think that's a good indicator, if you want to call it that, because hopefully, when we do have issues, elected members do come to myself or to Karen Bowen's team and report incidents, and we will assist and support members to give them advice. And in situations where members have found themselves in difficulties, essentially the first protocol is to report that, and then to support members, give them advice, and in particular, the need to contact the police where it's particularly an issue of concern. And the other matter relates to the fact that the IRPW, the Independent Panel for Wales, has basically stated that authorities must support the work of its councillors and statutory co-optees to enable them to carry out their duties, and that includes the safety of its councillors. So that's the purpose of the report in terms of just broadening out what we've done already in terms of providing information to members, but also this guidance that members hopefully can call upon as a simple aid memoir when they are out and about. But what we don't also have, as it stands at the moment, I've been speaking to other colleagues and other authorities, other heads of Democratic, what we don't have is any measure which would allow me as an officer to react to any individual requests in a quick way. So what we're asking the committee to do is to agree a delegation to myself and to the head of finance and Section 1.5 officer to deal with any emergency requests for assistance. And as I said, we haven't really had a lot of requests for support in this area, but that doesn't mean to say that won't change in the future. And given obviously the context with the elections coming up and members canvassing and such like, we do need to think about how we're going to try and safeguard members as best as we can do. So the delegation is to allow the authority to react to those emergency requests. I would say there's a caveat to that. It's requests that are generally come from the police or security services type event where there's been a specific threat that has been identified, but that doesn't mean to say that members can't ask for support on perhaps measures which need to be brought in for support of a lower level. But certainly the mechanism for the delegation is to allow that support to come online fairly quickly to support elected members. And the recommendations are in the report, seeking approval of the committee to take the matter to the cabinet and to council at its next meetings once the cabinet is cited on it, and the council can sign off on the process.
Thanks, Jeff. Does anyone have anything they want to add to this? I mean, I'm pretty happy to support this. I think I know George wants to come in. If anyone else, okay, we've got George and Andy in that case. I jumped the gun. George first, then Andy.
Thank you, Chair. On the whole, I think that this is eminently sensible. Obviously, the events of last month were absolutely horrific. What makes it even worse is that it's the second time that something like this has happened in the past 5 years. That said, we are very fortunate that such events are comparably rare. I nonetheless think that it's very good that the authority is taking this seriously and is bringing forward advice and other measures to try and assist members. The worst thing that could possibly happen, in my view, would be for members to stop engaging with their constituents and to stop providing the service that I think we're there to provide. And so any measures that can help us continue to do that in a safe way, I think should be welcomed. I, for one, will take some risk, but it's a risk I'm happy to take because it's why I do the job, is that I will go and see constituents. I will speak to them in their own homes. If I know that somebody is going to be aggressive or abusive, and to be honest, so far at least that's been very rare, if not non-existent, then obviously it's a judgment to make in that particular case. But these measures, I think, are sensible. The last thing I would want to see, though, would be us to stop being accessible to the public and not to be able to go and see people face to face, because I think that that's what we're there for. It's an important part of our democracy, and we shouldn't let the minority of people who have done some absolutely appalling and atrocious things win out and end democracy for the rest of us. So I think that it's sensible that advice and protocols are being brought forward to help us to continue that.
Good stuff, George. Agree with that wholeheartedly. Andy, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I'd like to say I think the package of advice is excellent. In fact, I thought it's so good. I took it over and showed it to the clerk of the community council this afternoon and suggested that we actually discuss it at that level in our management committee in the community council. I'm just wondering, I've been knocking on doors since about 2003, and I have noticed actually I don't know whether this is just for the Conservatives, but I have noticed that levels of aggression have gone down quite a lot over the last 17 years rather than going up. I can't quite understand how. I mean, when things do kick off, I mean, and it's usually just a slanging match. It happens very quickly. It happens very suddenly. So and basically, I don't understand how this being able to actually access funding for support actually helps, really, because I mean the other aspect of this is social media. I mean, there's a huge amount of incredibly unpleasant stuff that happens on social media. I'm very thick-skinned. I manage to ignore it if it's aimed at me. But I think my response to that is to use social media as little as possible for lots of reasons. I think it's a trap for elected members. You know, you can easily get drawn into a situation where you say things on social media. We've seen it over and over again, where people have said things, elected members at any level of politics have said things that they really shouldn't have said on social media. Maybe they've had a couple of drinks in the evening out with their meal and get into a discussion with somebody who's in opposition to them, and they say things that they shouldn't say. So basically, social media for me is something to be avoided as much as possible. But I don't understand. I mean, because of the quick fire or the very rapid way in which these events can happen, I don't see how you can't prepare for them, really. I mean, you knock on a door and somebody comes to the door and you say, hi, I'm your Conservative councillor. They become very aggressive. There's not much you can do about it in terms of getting in touch with you, Jeff, and saying, can you give me some financial support? You know, it doesn't work. You just make sure you don't knock on that door again. But I think it's a tricky one, and it's something that has always been there. I don't think this is a new thing. I think it's I think, as I said, as a Conservative, I think it's actually become less of a problem over the last 15 years. Anyway, thanks, Chair.
I'm guessing, Jeff, am I right in saying this? I mean, this is like most things. It's an evolving buffet where best practice emerges. This will continue to be improved and enhanced as people highlight issues that they face. I guess it's impossible to perhaps find every single issue at this stage and create the perfect finished product. We have to just keep evolving with these things.
I mean, what it's worth, I have got some background in health and safety. I think what you need to do is make sure you've got reasonable measures in place. And I take on board what Councillor Robertson is saying in terms of, you know, what you do when you're confronted. So, you know, this mechanism clearly isn't about those. I mean, it could be, because you just don't know how that event will develop. You know, if somebody comes to the door, you know, you're knocking on the door, you're trying to do your community work as a community councillor, and somebody immediately, you know, takes offence. You've knocked his door in the evening or wherever it is, and second, then you've made it clear, you know, as you're trying to engage him, you're saying you're the local elected member, and for whatever reason, you know, that sets him off without, you know, no advance warning. It is difficult. What I would say, and I'm taking account of Councillor Carroll's earlier comment, that, you know, it is about measuring risk. But, you know, what I would say is, if you're, you know, please follow the guidance. Please make sure that if you are going to go to a home visit, that you're telling somebody where you're going and when you're coming back, and a contact number, because that's the type of thing that potentially could go wrong where you're at risk on your own. And I would always say is, if you're going to attend any house, we have a lone working policy. If we had a member of staff, say in housing, going to see a tenant that, you know, maybe potentially difficult, they wouldn't be going on their own. You run a buddy system. So I always say to members, if you can go with somebody else, please go with somebody else. Don't always go on your own. And generally, don't go on your own, because you just do not know how things will turn on the day or the evening or whatever time of day it is. And clearly the events with Southend and you know, being in a surgery, which is clearly, being well marshaled. You've got exit in, exit out. Unfortunately, and this is where Chairman, you're saying it is a range of measures. Unfortunately, not everything will be covered in an event such as you had in Southend, where unfortunately that individual MP lost his life, and there is no justification. I am concerned for members. I am concerned at the general tone of hostility towards any appointed elected member. It doesn't matter if that's an MP. It doesn't matter if that's a Senate member. It doesn't matter if there's a principal authority. It doesn't matter if it's a town or a community council. So it is an issue of concern, and it's so much of an issue that the WLG have written to the police crime commissioners, asking them to please start looking at this in a more proactive way. So that's right across Wales. The 4 commissioners have been written to. So that probably gives you an indication of concern of not only the WLGA, the Welsh Government, officers within the organisation, and officers across the Wales who are charged with making sure that elected members are supported as best as they can be. Yes, the type of event that we're probably talking about, where the police or a security forces is very significant. What's happening? So, that's probably come from probably a trail of ongoing sinister behaviour perpetrated by one or more individuals. The sporadic event where you're out canvassing is very difficult to deal with. But what I would say is, as soon as you feel that you're presented with an individual it's borderline threatening, abusive, just remove yourself from the situation. Don't get into a spat. And all I would say with social media is the difficulty with just withdrawing from social media is there's a lot of youngsters, your potential new elected individuals in your communities will be looking at social media and probably trying to contact with you through social media. So just think that's an avenue to an audience that perhaps you're going to limit yourself access to. But the other issue is, again, social media. Yes, never a good idea to get into a discussion where you respond quickly to try and address concerns and you just immediately get another email and then a barrage of emails simply, potentially attacking you as an elected member for trying to do your best. So it is very difficult, the lines that you're walking with. But again, don't get into, discussions, heated debates on social media. We give advice. There is advice on the member net about how to conduct yourself when you're using social media. Please do your best as you can do. And admittedly, I'm conscious that when I'm saying this, I do want to stifle elected members when they are interacting with their community. It's a very difficult one, but it is a sad state of affairs that the level of respect towards elected members has gone down, in my view.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm looking forward to Andy's TikTok page starting up soon. Mark, you're first. Then I've got Sandra and Catherine.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment, Vince, about Andrews. I'm also looking forward to his TikTok page as well. But more seriously, though, I think, there are valid points made. On social media, I think you've got to try and be positive about things and looking at solving solutions rather than trying to find problems. I think that's key, and I know that's difficult, especially if you're in opposition, because often you want to stir things up. I get it, but also I think the other point is worth considering as well, and I think you're right, and I think it's for people like George. I think if you're a single member in a ward, then I do think you have some issues. I mean, it's easy in a multi-member ward, and most of us are, but people like George and other people in the Western Vale who are on their own, it's much more difficult. You're a much more vulnerable position. And I think, Joe, especially during period of times when you can't really have officers with you because they got to be neutral, I think you really just got to arrange a phone call, an email or whatever, rather than go and visit them, not unless you know them really well, to be quite honest. Also, I think what's also good practice also is that when you do see someone, follow it up with an email or follow it up with something so that you've agreed some action, so that there's no misrepresentation going on. I think that's key as well on this. And I think you're right. If you're going to go and visit someone, you tell your other half or whatever, your partner or your friend or whatever, I'm going to be this amount of time. And they can always, if you're not, then tell them to phone you or whatever and say, is everything, you can say something, text, is everything okay? Or text someone, are you all right or whatever, so that people know, that you are okay. But you're right. I think in accommodation, the first thing you could think about is, can I get out of this accommodation quite easily? Don't put yourself in there too much. Don't get too cozy. Just go there for the purpose. That's what you are, and that's it. I mean, I think a lot of this should be guidance to new members, new candidates as well, when they're beginning, so they don't overplay and become perhaps, too helpful, because that will bite them in the end, in the sense that you can't be everybody's friend. You've got to sometimes make and say things that perhaps people don't always like, so, you always got to be careful there that you are there to represent them, but you also know there's financial issues, there are other constraints, and there's things that are going on. But yeah, it's not easy. And I think you're right, social media, in some ways, is a good thing, as you said rightly, about accessibility to younger people, but in some ways, it makes people quite negative as well. And I think you've got to reach that balance. But thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Sandra first, then Catherine.
Thank you, Chair. I do think that we, need to take precautions when we're out and about. Basically, no, you can't. If you're knocking on the door and someone starts being abusive to you, you're not, you don't expect that. But actually going into someone's property, then you do really need to let somebody know what property you're going into and what time you expect to be out, and that you will call them when you're out as well. You don't know what you're walking into. You don't know what issues people have and what can be triggers for them. And also, sort of having that money, sort of access to that money. I'm assuming that could be for safety alarms or things like that councillors might have. And I would definitely agree with that pot of money being easily accessible by officers for a councillor who's going through a particularly difficult experience. I just wondered, Jeff, whether before the election process is now coming up in the next year, whether it's just worth reminding us all as councillors, and whether there's, sort of feasibility of doing that, sort of, obviously it can't be at full council, but whether just a 5-minute at scrutiny committees, the different scrutiny committees, so people are aware of it. Because I just think sometimes we get blasé and we need to be, extra cautious, really, not stopping seeing or talking to our residents and stuff like that, but just to have it reiterated to us, really, to think about it. That's all I wanted to say.
That's a good suggestion, that is, Sandra. Catherine.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's a couple of points really off the back of this. I think it depends how all of us got here in the first place. Obviously, some of we've all got different life experience. I've been a lone worker for 25 years before I started doing this, so my attitude and understanding was all of this was a given, because that's how I've always lived my working life. But obviously for people who haven't, it's a totally different conversation. And I think that when we're talking again about trying to encourage more people to get involved, when people see the terrible headlines about MPs being attacked and killed, then it's going to put people off on a massive scale, thinking, why would I put my head above the parapet to represent people if this is what we get? So it's really reassuring, so that we've got a cohesive policy to allow people to know that the council do have their back, that if they are going to be councillors, and they are going to look after them. And finally, just on a personal note, when I first was a councillor, I did get lots of texts off a random person and nobody knew who they were, didn't actually talk to me, a little bit strange. And Democratic Services were amazing, and they did everything they possibly could. It wasn't to the point where I was scared, but even with my 25 years of working on my own, it was odd enough to go, that's a bit strange. But the department were really helpful, so I just wanted to make that point as well while we were here. Thank you.
Yeah, well said, Catherine. I think that is everyone who wanted to speak on this item.
Sorry, Chairman, can I just come back in terms of a couple of points that Councillor Perks has mentioned? When we talk about the pot of money, I wouldn't expect a member waiting for a delegation to be used for the personal alarm, attack alarm, for example. So if a member was looking for a device similar to that, which is quite small, that could be provided very quickly. The type of the type of things or the type of control measures I'm talking about that may need the use of the delegation with the Section 151 officer is something like when the police come to us and say, for example, we've got to install the CCTV system with floodlights and everything around the property. It's because that individual member is being subject to insidious attacks one way, whether that's on the property, the cars, vehicles. It could be that they've been, present and children leaving to go to and from school. That type of presence, which is unwelcome, stalking type of events, for example. So when that becomes apparent to us, and the police are involved, and the police, or again, if you're a more senior member at an elected position where, for example, the security services are involved, that's the type of thing where perhaps the use of resources will be more significant, Councillor Perks. And therefore, the cost in terms of funding that would need, the delegation and to be considered as part of that process with the Section 151 officer. The whole purpose is meant to speed up the process so there aren't any delays effectively. But what I wouldn't want is members who think that they need a small device like a personal attack alarm, for example, that they feel that they shouldn't ask for it. Okay, that's fundamentally what we would do for employees who are out working, in an environment where they're potentially at risk, for example, on their own. So that's what we would do. So that would not be an issue, and that would not be something I consider to fall under these measures, these low level devices and support measures. I don't think this is what we're talking about. Something more significant than that. I did want to say something else, but it's gone from me now. But yes, hopefully members will see this as a process. Oh, in terms of Councillor Perks's comment, and in recommendation 1 is that obviously the endorsement of the committee will make this available, the guidance on the website, and we will immediately email out subject to council and cabinet signing off on this process. So hopefully members will have sight of it. Hopefully, when they are out and about in the coming months, if they are thinking of coming back and standing in the elections, that they'll have a copy with this. And certainly in terms of the way that they organise themselves amongst groups or even individuals, that you have regard to that and use either the group mechanism or support within the family to make sure people know where you are, so you do keep safe. It is an issue for me, genuine issue, that those type of events in Southend are very scary, and you just don't know what. I know you've got to try and keep in perspective, but we have to be wary of the circumstances we live in these current days.
Thanks, Jeff. And I'm sure the group leaders will probably want to share this with members of their groups as well. So just in terms of the recommendations, I'm assuming I'm okay to not read them all out. They're there on the paper. Is everyone happy to support 1, 2, and 3 rather than me taking the time to read the paragraphs out? Any objections? No. Brilliant. Okay, moving on to item 6 then, the Diversity in Democracy Action Plan.
Sorry, it's me again. Right. So if members recall, we brought in front of council in the summer, July, the matter of making a diverse council declaration, and that went through council. And part of that resolution was to develop an action plan of activity in advance of next year's local government elections in 2022. The original plan when we brought that to council was to form a subcommittee of this committee, but I have to say, because of various challenges amongst Officer Corps with other equally urgent and challenging priorities, we just haven't managed to get that off the ground. So this is why, instead of coming to a subcommittee of this committee, we're bringing it directly to the committee for endorsement and then to recommend to Cabinet and Council. So set out at Appendix A to the report are a number of actions that are in the draft action plan, and that work in effect is already ongoing, if you want to call it that. So there are a number of measures already underway, and of course we're already planning ahead for next year I think Councillor Wilson mentioned about candidates and information given to candidates next year, and certainly we'll be holding open events next. Sort of, I think it's going to be in March off the top of my head. Don't hold me to that, but we're certainly going to hold 3 sessions for councillors, and indeed for returning members if they want to come along to these sessions, if they would like to do that. And part of that process is to just give some very informal but basic information in terms of what members can expect from the off. In terms of the life of an elected member. There are also other measures in there that are ongoing in terms of electoral registration teams. So, for example, the activities in advance of the Senate elections earlier this year, so winding it back a year, so in preparation for Senate this time, in 2020, there would have been a lot of work going and underway with schools and raising the knowledge of youngsters in terms of the benefits of voting and being registered to vote. So there's actions in there. There are also going to be media campaigns linked to certain work that is ongoing that sits within the Education and Youth Partner Service. And of course, there are other measures that have come as a consequence of the Local Government of Wales Elections Act. So, for example, the guidance is in there around duty of councils to produce a public participation strategy, a new one, so to review and have a new one. There's also a requirement, well, certainly there's an entitlement for job sharing at certain senior salaries, if that was a matter that the administration want to consider. There's a duty on group leaders to promote and maintain high standards of conduct of members within their groups. Of course, issues around hybrid meetings, electronic conducting of meetings, and obviously the issues that Councillor Robertson made reference to earlier about family absence arrangements. And again, those measures are already in the pipeline. They're in our constitution, and they're already there. So there are other measures in there in the document itself. For example, training for members, making sure the training is in place, mentoring for elected members. Certainly democratic services can support members once they're elected. I'm mindful of historical factors, for example, that mentoring by and large is usually done within the political groups. It's not necessarily mentoring shared across groups as such, so you don't necessarily have one group offering mentoring to another political group. It's generally kept within each of the groups, and that's absolutely fine. But as long as it works, that's absolutely advisable. Of course, things like making sure that members can claim the various support in terms of the IRPW determinations, that's already in train. So there's quite a lot of work that is already underway. Training around social media that will be put in place, future member development, and I'm happy to take any questions that members may have on the document.
Thanks, Jeff. Do we have any questions or comments on this full set of measures? I think one of the things that's really key in there is about promoting the role of a councillor, and I think that it might help people not only to understand what we do, but it might, if people realise the difference that they can make in their local communities, so that's what it's all about, they might be encouraged and inspired to get involved in that score, as well as all the other measures that you expect, stuff that's in train already. Andy, you've got your hand up. Do you want to come in first?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. Just very briefly, I think we still come down to the problem of encouraging people to actually stand for as councillors. I think this is going to be an ongoing situation for lots of reasons we've already discussed this evening. People don't like to put their heads above the parapet. And really, this is, in the end, because of the way our politics is arranged, it's going to come down to political groups as to how diverse our council is in the end. And we'll try very hard. I can promise this, as on behalf of my party, we'll try very hard to make our candidate representation as diverse as possible. But in the end, you can only put up what you get. Thanks.
I think there's two sides to the coin to that on there. I mean, at the end of the day, the parties do have a massive responsibility, and it's in the interest of individual parties to attract new, credible, excellent candidates, and that helps boost diversity and see the faces that are in the chamber changing all the time. But also, as an institution, the council's got a responsibility to play its part as well, because there'll be a lot of people who won't be reached. They don't want to be reached by political parties, and perhaps, you know, having an institutional sort of corporate message that's appealing does have a role as well. But I think it's definitely both, isn't it? You know, Jeff, you've got your hand up, presumably to come back in on what Andy just said there.
I'm happy to come in after Councillor McCafford, if that's fine, Chairman, if you like.
Yeah, go for it. Do you want to come in, Catherine?
Thanks, Chair. I totally take on board what you say, because obviously we're all sitting in different places now. And I think that Jeff and I have had conversations around this, that a lot of people, like you say, Chair, are put off by political persuasions either way. And I think that if we can do more as a council, just to say, well, if you can stand to represent your community, and even if people think they want to stand on one single thing to start with, they're involved. And as you get involved, the more involved you become in other items. So I think it is really valid that we do make sure that as the council as a whole, we are as welcoming, when we have that corporate presence to show that we will support you, even if you don't represent a party particularly, because I think there is a value in having independent councillors, because you can take every point from every side and you eventually work out what is the best way forward, because that's what we're all here for, is to make sure our council functions to the best of its abilities for the people that we represent. So as long as we take that on board, that's fine, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. Yeah, I mean,
okay.
It's a bit like what Andy said about passing over the report to Dinas Powys Community Council about the safety side of things. I mean, if at Town Council, Community Council, you see a lot more independent councillors, and hopefully, you know, if they see stuff like this being produced by the Vale, it'll trickle down to the community and town councils as well, and encourage people even more so, because that very much is a voluntary role, and quite often you see people will stand on very micro local issues, and that might get them involved in the first instance before standing at a Vale level afterwards. Jeff, before you come in, do you want Mark to come in first? Mark?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Vince. Basically, I think it's okay if you belong to a party or grouping whereby you got that kind of internal kind of discipline. I think that's easier. But I think when you got members who don't belong to a group or largely unaligned members, and we've seen that at community councils where things do go wrong sometimes, because we have people who don't have that kind of party discipline or group discipline. They're not part of that. And I think that's where you have issues and concerns. And I think there's sometimes, I don't think Westminster helps in this situation at all, it's about an understanding of things like declarations of interest and conflict of interest. And I think that needs to be pretty much educated, because I think a lot of it is about perception. Now, if the public perceive you to have a conflict, even if you don't personally think you got a conflict, you really should declare. I mean, we had a legal officer way back in the 18th century when I first came to council called Peter Evans, and he was very much emphasised this. And he said basically, you know, declarations of interest are really not necessarily what you think you could declare, but really what the public thinks your perception is that you've got a conflict. And if you think the public see that you've got a conflict, then really you should withdraw yourself from the room and from that discussion. And I think a lot of that is good advice, to be quite honest. And I think these are sort of the areas where perhaps, I mean, we do have a lot of good compulsory sessions as a council at the beginning, but again, I would flag this up to candidates that stand in as well. You know, that, you know, because you're a councillor doesn't mean you got an interest outside, you can put that interest into the council and make a difference. In fact, it's the opposite. In fact, in many ways, you've got less role, less power than you have as a member of the public. And I think some people don't understand that, but it's about perception. And I think that's something I would like to emphasise.
It speaks to another issue as well, I suppose, Jeff. From your point of view as an officer, you've got a very different challenge when you're trying to educate and support new councillors who come in as an independent, because, again, referring back to that safety report, you have that kind of solidarity and support in numbers by being a member of a group in some respects. And so it's important to make sure that if we do get a sudden influx of lots of independent councillors, that they, touch on what Mark just said there, given the support and guidance they need, but also the confidence, because they're going to be acting a lot more alone. in that regard, and you don't want people to feel discouraged because it's quite a lonely job if you are just, like even George going around in Landock on his own. That's quite a lonely job sometimes. And it'll be even more so if you're not part of a group in some respects, unless that support is there from yourselves. Anyway, that's all I wanted to add. You want to come back in?
I only just wanted to say it is a tricky one, and when you talk about candidates, and we certainly haven't done these open day events or fresher events, I like to call them, with candidates, and it's a tricky one because what you don't want to do is and I'm just mindful of Councillor Robertson's comments about the number of candidates that you may have access to. So the diversity action plan is actually about trying to future-proof groups, the community. It's also trying to get the message across that actually standing for locally elected office is actually a good thing. It's something you can use in terms of career development, something you can put on a CV as you go forward. So there are many benefits from being an elected member. The issue for candidates is, and particularly independent ones, is yes, we know that they don't necessarily come from a cohort of through a political association and that route, but I think we've got a very good record in terms of democratic services and the support we have provided. I can think of by-elections where for example in Roos, where we had an independent member come in, and you immediately identify that they do need the support. From an officer's perspective, we've got a duty of care to everybody. As an organisation, members got a duty of care for themselves, but certainly independent members coming in, so for example, Roos a few years ago, where we put in a lot of support for that individual coming in. Where you have groups develop into independent groups, again, we'll support them, but of course we make a lot of effort in those initial weeks post members coming in and signing that declaration of office and those essential sessions, which we don't call them essential for no reason. We used to call it mandatory. We're trying to soften the approach, because if you say to people it's mandatory and you must do this, tends to get sometimes a negative reactions. We're trying to be as inclusive as we can be, but saying to members, if this is a really good idea, if it says essential, you really should be coming along to these sessions. And of course, some sessions, if you don't attend, you can't sit on committees, of course. So you don't rock up to the licensing session. You don't come along to, if you certainly don't come to the code of conduct training with a monitoring officer, you're probably going to get an email from the monitoring officer. So yeah, anybody says, monitoring officers are pushovers. No, not in my experience over 30 plus years. And Councillor Wilson's right talking about, the former director of legal, Peter Evans, Legal Evans. It is an issue, where declarations come into it. It's a fine line, because often or not, if you're a new member coming into local government, you may not even be in a community council. You've come in completely as a virgin to it all, and you're thinking, what is a declaration? So we do sit members down, and we do try and explain as best we can do that it isn't what you perceive as an interest, what the public will obviously take account of. If you don't declare it, it comes to light, and then that's when it becomes an issue. Unfortunately, it always becomes an issue. So I always say to members, if in doubt, you either get out of the meeting, or if you're in doubt, seek advice as best as you can do. And often the advice that you will get from colleagues in Democratic, from Karen's team, hopefully will set members on the right footing.
Thanks, Jeff. Karen, you've got your hand up. Would you like to come in?
Yes, Chair, on a point that you mentioned earlier about communicating with town and community councils, I just wanted to mention that we do have regular meetings between clerks and the monitoring officer, which we have taken to Community Liaison Committee. I just wanted to mention there's another one coming up this week, and some of the issues we're talking about today, particularly becoming a councillor, is on that agenda. So I just wanted to advise you, because I know there's a number of you who are on town and community councils, so we do have regular contacts with the clerks. Thanks.
Sorry, Chairman. Just to add, one of the actions in this action plan is we're actually going to be there'll be a next bit of project work we'll be doing within Karen's team, is to look at becoming a councillor page as it stands at the moment. So I don't think it's particularly good. I think if it takes you 4 clicks to get to that information, and by the way, When I looked at it last week, I wasn't particularly pleased to see what I saw. So we'll be making sure that the prominence of that web page will be in the new year as best as we can do in January, brought up to what I consider to be more engaging. So that'll be another piece of work that Karen's team will be working on. So there are quite a lot of moving parts going on in the run up to this election. Of course, Karen's team will be heavily involved in the induction process from May onwards. So yes, yeah, it's going to be a busy time for everybody.
Indeed it is. Indeed it is. All right. Well, thank you for that, Jeff. There's no one else with their hand up. I think, judging from the conversation that we've had, it seems that we'd all be happy to support this and refer it as requested under the recommendations. And unless there's any objections, we'll do just that. There's nothing I've decided that will be urgent under either part 1 or part 2. So yeah, no, thanks everyone for joining. It's been a great, a really interesting discussion and debate.
Can I just say, Chairman? Can I say, Chairman? Thank you to all members for supporting these proposals. It's much appreciated.
There you are. Brilliant. And thank you all. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good
Thank you, Chair.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.